Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is buttermint tea, which is good, but a bit of a risk in this weather because it's just, even with air conditioning, it's just been hot and gross. But I am not alone in that complaint, so I don't think we need to delve too far into that. But I thought I'd do a kind of a check-in because it's still July and didn't want to wait till the end of the month to do a full-on wrap-up. I thought, usually I do something in the middle of the month, but didn't, so I thought I'd do a check-in, and mainly about Jane Austen. So, because this is Jane Austen July, and I've finished two of her books, and I intend to read more things pertaining to Jane Austen. We'll see. But this is what I finished so far, and I have a few other things going. We'll see what makes it to the actual finish line. The first book that I finished in July. Oh, I hate the sticker on this thing. I'm still working on it to get all the stickiness off, but it had one of those labels that just didn't come off properly. Anyway, this is Mansfield Park, and yeah, it is actually the second time I've ever read it through, and I'm glad now that I did, because since then I've seen two adaptations that were both not great. One turned her into Jane Austen, basically, substitute, and the second one turned her into Billie Piper, who's not a bad person, I don't think, but Billie Piper kind of looks very energetic and even played the part as much more, I don't know, giggly and almost flirty. I don't know if that's the right word, but it just didn't seem quite how Fanny Price was portrayed. And I think that people who try to do these adaptations, they try to make Fanny Price more likable because they think that she isn't. And I do think that she is, in some ways, an acquired taste. But I feel a little bit defensive of her, and I don't want to make an entire video about that because it's been done, But I thought about it even now, but it's harder to think about it now just because social life has changed so much for me in the past year or two, obviously. But I thought more of when I first read it. So I don't get too much into it being about me, because it's not. It's not. Fanny Price and I don't relate in every way. But in one way we do. And that is just in health. And Fanny Price, there's never really a definition of what is wrong with her, because maybe there isn't something specifically. Maybe she's just not as healthy in terms of energy levels as her sisters, for instance, and Mary Crawford and everybody else. She needs to rest a little quicker than other people. She really tries not to complain about it. Not to get into persuasion yet, she's not a Mary Musgrove. She's not like a hypochondriac. But she is just, I don't know. She can go just so far and then she needs to rest, basically. And sometimes she gets headaches and felt faint a couple of times. And so there's no particular thing that you can point to. But I think I had liked that because when I was in college, it was difficult because, well, one always compares oneself to other people. In every way. The people I socialized with really wasn't anyone I went to school with, but just the people I did. They were already people I couldn't keep up with in terms of energy levels, in terms of conversation, everything. They just seemed miles ahead of me, and I was always feeling left behind. Even people who care about me, I just felt like I didn't actually know how to talk to people, and I think I would come across as a little bit prim and proper to a lot of people. I know that there were some people that my friends and I hung out with my sisters too, so we were all probably different kinds of people. But I remember people would come up to me and go, "Hello, Catherine," because I think I had that sort of air about me that was just a little uptight or something. And I don't think Fanny Price is incredibly uptight. I think she just has standards and morals, etc., that she sticks to, and especially of the time, that she wasn't necessarily wrong. But even the energy level thing, I thought about, because when I was in college, I remember knowing a lot of people who could go to school and they could also at the same time have a job or two jobs, and maybe some of them had family to look after, some of them had very active social lives, some of them did volunteer work, all kinds of things that they could do at once. And I could go to school. I had a mild social life. I did a few other extracurricular things, but I couldn't have a job and go to school. And I always felt much more tired than, and I couldn't take care of it by drinking like coffee and stuff because I would just get sick. So I couldn't even really keep up the study habits of some people who would do all-nighters, things like that. I couldn't do any of that. And so I would always walk around feeling a bit deficient as a person. So when I was reading of Fanny Price, there was a bit of a, oh, okay, it is so cool. Although I don't know if I thought of it in comparison to everything, but it was amazing to me that Jane Austen could have someone like her. Someone who probably lacked confidence in certain ways, but then realized her own strengths sometimes, but still lacked a lot of confidence because she was treated like someone who was less than in her home. Although I wasn't treated like that. Thankfully, my family wasn't like that. But I was a middle child, and you know what they say about middle children. So yeah, she wasn't like my hero, but she was definitely a relief to me after reading about people like Elizabeth Bennet who was just like awesome and so cool and could just make all these responses and stick up for her family and also stand up to Mr. Darcy and do all kinds of things. I still love Elizabeth Bennet very much. But yeah, I like that they put a Fanny Price in there. And there's so much about Mansfield Park that is something else. Like Henry Crawford, there's always that why. Why did he improve in some ways and then fall apart? Not that he probably was able to walk away unscathed in this situation, but yeah. And I did notice a paragraph in which Jane Austen brings out the fact that one of the things that protected Fanny Price was her feelings for someone else. So it wasn't like she was just this miraculous person who could stand up to the charms of a Henry Crawford because she was just so amazing. Yeah, she did a pretty good job of it, but it might have been different if she hadn't already had feelings for someone else and that got in the way. So I like that because that makes her more human. She's not this saint. She is a good person and she is kind in so many ways, but she's not a saint. And I like that. And of course, many people have referred to, even just this month, there's a passage in here about her own space in her home where she has her things and her books and everything. And that, I don't think you need to just be an introvert to like that, but anyone who just loves their little spaces, a room of one's own, all that kind of thing. There's just so many little bits of Mansfield Park that if you didn't read the book and you only knew the story from the adaptations, you would have a completely different view. I'm still trying to figure out what I think of her uncle, Bertram, because he isn't necessarily horrible to her, but she finds him intimidating. And there are those hints that he was involved in the slave trade. You don't know how far, and that's kind of hard because that is something that no one looks good, in the light of day in that situation. But as a family person, well, I think he kind of learns his lesson. I don't think in that respect he was as much of a horrible tyrant as some of at least one of the films kind of made him out to be. And I really was mad at the second adaptation that I watched with Billie Piper because I hadn't watched the whole thing until this month. I'd watched bits of it, so I knew parts of it, and I was just like, yeah, I don't get this. But they took out so many parts, like the Portsmouth chapters, which is an important part of Fanny's life. If you haven't read Mansfield Park or if you haven't read Mansfield Park, this might be a little bit of a spoiler, so just FYI. But she wasn't like thrust back into her old life with her parents and her siblings as a horrible punishment, but there was a thought of, well, maybe she'll learn to look at Mansfield Park in a more appreciative light. And she did, even though that wasn't everything that she took away from it, but she did end up missing what was really now her home, so that you learn a lot about what really home is. And I thought, and I know this is probably not for me to really explore because I don't really relate to this quite. But I kind of thought of her as possibly like what an immigrant might feel like if you've emigrated to another country, for instance, and you are considered a foreigner where you live, and you have to get used to the ways of people, and you always feel a little bit left out. But eventually you return to what was your original home to visit, and everybody kind of thinks of you as different, and you don't quite relate to them either, because now you've taken on mannerisms and thoughts of where you've moved to. So there's always that between world. So I wonder if anyone of, in that experience relates to that. I can't know because I'm not. But I also thought that it's not just that, but there's a lot of people in general, whatever your situation, that just feel like they don't quite belong. Where there's people that they think that they're going to relate to more because, oh yeah, they have this thing and I'm like that too. And then you talk to them or you read about them and you say, wait a minute, I don't quite belong there either. You know what I mean? So there is a sort of feeling of belongingness and what is home and where do you feel most appreciated and most at home and relatable and whatever. So there's all kinds of things that can be explored. And that's just like the tip of the iceberg. But I really did like this book, as I like all of Jane Austen's novels. I still don't think it's going to be one of my highest rated ones. But I don't know if I'm going to do my rating or not this month. We'll see. We've got some time left. But you know how fast time goes. And then I read this, Recipe for Persuasion by Sonali Dev. And it is actually the second book of hers that is a Jane Austen... that is a Jane Austen, what do you call it? I don't know. Not pastiche, but like a retelling. There it is. Modern retelling. There we go. Sorry. I'm recording on my phone and I saw like a notification, so I got completely distracted. This is what happens in life. It's the second of 3. The third one just came out. The first one is a Pride and Prejudice, and this is Persuasion, obviously, and the third one's going to be Sense and Sensibility. And this doesn't have everything in common with Persuasion, but it has like the main thing of, a young couple who were really close. And then something happens in which the woman turns down the man and he goes away. And years later they reunite and she's not doing great in a lot of ways. And he's very successful. And now they've come together. Of course, it's a different world now, but she was just in a different kind of situation. She was more involved in sports and stuff like that, and so was he. And his name is Rico in here, like Frederico, like Frederick, Wentworth. And her name is Ashna. I forgot already. It's been like a week. My brain is so easily distracted, but and now she is, she's like the chef at, and she owns her, it's not quite the right word, but she runs, this Indian restaurant that was her father's, and her father died in rather messed up circumstances, and, the restaurant's not doing very well, and she has a mother who is alive, but they're kind of estranged, and she has an aunt who seems like the Lady Russell, but not exactly the same, but in that sort of surrogate mother situation, stepping in here and there, and aside from a few other mild comparisons, obviously he is not a Captain Wentworth. He is a soccer player, football player, whatever you want to call it, and she has a job, which Anne Elliot could never have, I suppose, because that was a rarity in those days. It has a few things in common. There's a point at which he gets jealous a little bit out of nowhere, and you're like, oh, because you see the fact that maybe he isn't quite over her, But it's not exactly the same story, and that's okay, because that's the point of retelling. It's for, you don't want it to be exactly the same. But Yeah, so there's a lot of things that happen in the actual Book of Persuasion that don't happen in here. Um, but it has that just that same feeling of, many years have passed, and are they the same people? What will happen, with their feelings, etc. But it's mainly a romance, but it's not really what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a more like rom-com. You know what I mean? I thought it was going to be a little more humorous, and ended up actually kind of being intense. I said to someone that it reminded me a little bit of if you watch a Bollywood movie thinking it's going to be all dancing and singing and, a couple of laughs and a little bit of like a romantic storyline. And then you watch a lot of Bollywood movies and they are intense and some horrible tragedies sometimes that happen. But I haven't watched a new Bollywood movie in a very long time, but in the late 90s and early 21st century, I watched a lot of them, so it's my little comparison. But anyway, but yeah, so there's a lot of tragedy, and I didn't expect that kind of tragedy, and this month, the month of July has always been a bit of a difficult month for me, because there's been a lot of things that happened to me in July, or to people that I care about, and so when I don't expect something and I felt like it hit me a little bit head on. So just FYI, if you're not expecting it to be like that, if you think it's just going to be a lighthearted romp, you know what I mean? It has its lighthearted moments. It does have the occasional funny moment, but it really is a lot of things. Ashna herself is an interesting character, but she has some serious things to work through. And I kind of like hope that she actually gets a little bit of help, because she has been through things. And yeah, so I still say it was a good story and romantic and everything, but just know that, to be prepared that was going to be part of the story. It doesn't really say that in the description, although I did when I went back to review it on Goodreads, which I didn't really do an in-depth one, but I read a couple of the reviews and they said that too. Yeah, oh man, we didn't see that coming, When I was reading that, and then also reading Persuasion, I actually thought of something that I haven't seen. I haven't read this in a long time, so, which is apropos, considering what the book is called. But it just made me think of this book, and I want to get back to this again. And it's called After Many Days. It's Ella Montgomery. It's a collection of her stories. I have a bunch of these that came out in, I think, late 80s, early 90s. Let me see when this was published. 92. So, obviously it was written a lot earlier, because Ella Montgomery. But, I mean, compiled, this particular compilation was put together around that time. And when I was reading Anne of Green Gables and all Emily of New Moon and The Story Girl and all the other books that Ella Montgomery wrote, she also, I didn't know getting into it that she had written so many short stories, and this was just the one about people who haven't seen each other in years, and now they are reunited, and just different types of circumstances. So I just thought I'd mention that, because that's what I thought of with any kind of persuasion story. I wonder if I had thought about that when I first read Persuasion, because it's been so long since I first read Persuasion. This was not... Okay, so getting to Persuasion, because this is like one of my favorite books ever, ever, ever. This is not a book that I read in the 90s and haven't read till now. I have reread this many times, and it is just very good. I still think it is my favorite Jane Austen, although Pride and Prejudice comes so close. But it has... I loved it when I first read it, but I think I love it even more now. I don't know if I realized it until now. Maybe I did, and maybe I just forgot that I remembered this, because my memory is terrible lately. But I realized she was about 28 when she goes to Bath, and I was like, when I visited Bath that one time, I was about 28, and I was like, I wonder if that even occurred to me when I was there. I don't think it did, And it's funny because it's different now. If you're in your late 20s and you're not married, well, there's other things in life, you know what I mean? You're not at the end of your rope. You don't have like nothing left for you, But Persuasion is, yeah, I haven't read it. I didn't really go into too much of a description of Mansfield Park, but Persuasion is a beautiful story of uh, a girl who came from a family that, it's a nice, they have a kind of a high position, but her mother died somewhat, leaving her motherless pretty young. And her mother seems to be the one with the best head on her shoulders in the family. And so now it was her father, who was super vain, and her older sister, who is also pretty vain and silly, and her younger sister, who is, like I said before, Mary Musgrove, a bit of a hypochondriac. But I actually felt for her, just as a little side point, because even though it seems that Aunt Elliot was the least favorite daughter of her father's, Mary is kind of overlooked in so many ways. She's just kind of married off, and she's not as well liked by the family she marries into as she might like, but a lot of that's her own fault, maybe. But they all seem to like Anne very much and look to her for, advice and stuff, but not so much for Mary. And I kind of felt bad for her in that way, especially because, she marries this guy that she married after Anne had turned him down. That probably doesn't feel great. So I almost wanted just to really feel more charitable toward her, but sometimes she just gets so like, but what about me? I want attention. It's like, oh goodness, exasperating. But anyway, yeah, so when Anne is, of a marriageable age, I guess, she meets Frederick Wentworth, who is a sailor, and, he might have some promising things about him, but at the time there was not really much for him to go on. And family friend Lady Russell is well-meaning, but she, among other things, persuades Anne to give up her relationship with Wentworth, and he leaves, and he, of course, was much more upset about it, and maybe that actually affected his own decisions. He makes certain mistakes that might have, if he hadn't made certain mistakes, he might have been able to come back and be close to her again. But in the meantime, they're separated for about, I think they said 8 years or so. And in the meantime, her family, who was, a well-to-do family, are in a bit of rough straits, you know what I mean? And they need to really, as they say, retrench. And now they have to move. The family is going to be moving into a little place in Bath, and they're going to rent out their big home to a couple who is, Admiral Croft and his lovely wife. One of the best marriages in Jane Austen's. There's a lot of good marriages if you really look into it. There are a lot of good or decent marriages. It's just that the bad ones in the stories seem to come out more. But Mrs. Croft is the sibling, the sister of who is now Captain Wentworth, who is going to be coming back after a very successful time. He's come into a lot of money, and he's well regarded, and now, he comes into the neighborhood, and all the female folk are like, ooh, and, she is older and kind of considered at this point in her life over the hill, and her sisters-in-law are, both of them, kind of all over Captain Wentworth, and they're kind of silly girls, not in the Lydia Bennet way, maybe closer to Kitty Bennet, but silly but not horribly silly, And Anne is just there, kind of in the background all the time, but you see her kind of like Fanny Price, but not exactly. She is a very strong person, but just quiet. She needs a lot of solitude herself. It seems a lot of times she has thoughts and she needs to get away, to have a little time to herself to think something over. But she's also quite helpful to a lot of people, and she has a very cool mind about her. So that's the whole story. Is she, can she and Captain Wentworth find their way together, or will there be someone else? Because there's other men that turn up that, might have an interest in her as well. And then there's all kinds of extras, like the fact that she meets someone who's really into poetry at a time where the romantic poets were around. And they're mentioned, and that's pretty cool. As someone who likes romantic poets myself, and also just history in general. You know, they say that Jane Austen doesn't really talk about what was going on. But Trafalgar is mentioned. The Battle of Trafalgar is actually mentioned early in the story. So it's not like there's absolutely no idea. Like Jane Austen doesn't just do Once Upon a Time. It's just that she doesn't hyper focus on that sort of thing. But I think this one really does show the most of how what was going on with England and the rest of the world was actually affecting people's lives. And although other stories do too. I mean, obviously Pride and Prejudice has the officers, you know. But yeah, I just love Persuasion, and of course it has the letter, which I always talk about, is what pillows falling, which is to me one of the best things in any of Jane Austen's books. One of the things I like about Jane Austen is that, honestly, even though I like, you know, romantic things, usually she's not overly drippy with romance. She's kind of like, she'll write a story and then oh yes, now I'm going to put them together. They're going to end up together. Like with, you know, Mansfield Price, the way she kind of ties things up, you know. She's like, all right, now let's put this, you know. With Persuasion, she actually makes it a little more romantic, and I don't know if that was just all her years of experience that made her realize that would be kind of a nice thing to put in. I don't know, but it is beautiful. It's a great story. And so yes, a good month so far for reading. I have a lot more that I'm reading that I'm not going to get into now because we're already well into close to 30 minutes at this point. But I did, yes, like I mentioned before, I watched a lot of adaptations. I watched Persuasion from 95. I watched one of the Mansfield Parks, for better or worse. I watched Pride and Prejudice. I watched the 2007-ish, I think, Sense and Sensibility, which is actually really good. I feel like I'm forgetting something. But yeah, so it was fantastic. I thought, you know, because Persuasion is such a pivotal scene happens on a beach area, by the seaside, I should say. I went to the beach this week, finally, after a long time. I hadn't been to the beach, and I didn't spend that long there, but I had a great time. The air was so good for me. And then the next day, the weather was so hazy and gross that my lungs once again, oh, I am one of those people in Jane Austen, yes. So I'm going to leave you there for now. Let me know if you've been reading any Jane Austens or what you think of these books, etc. So for now, this is Catherine taking tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and Jane Austen-filled day.